The neighbors whispered about the woman at the end of the street. She never smiled, never spoke, just walked her service dog, Richter, through the quiet hours before dawn. What they didn't see were the nightmares that kept her awake, the memories that made ordinary conversation feel impossible. When Sarah Carter, Marine Corps veteran decorated for conspicuous gallantry, was arrested for public disturbance after a PTSD episode at the grocery store, her case moved through the small-town courthouse without much notice. But when the courtroom doors opened, the whispers faded. The woman they'd dismissed as troubled was about to become impossible to ignore. Sarah Carter's house sat at the dead end of Maple Street, where the pavement gave way to weeds and the siding peeled in strips from years of neglect. The only sign of life came before dawn, when her service dog Richter's collar would jingle past darkened windows. She moved through town, invisible hood drawn up, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the sidewalk ahead. Every night, before sunrise, she walked for just over half an hour, always the same route, always the same pace. The neighbors called it the ritual, but they never guessed she was walking to keep ahead of the nightmares. At the diner, the book club ladies swapped theories about her. "Saw her staring at my kids once," said the woman from 421 Maple. "Gave me chills." The barista at Brood Awakening told anyone who'd listen about the time Sarah's dog, Richter, blocked a customer who got too close in line. What the barista didn't know was that Richter's harness was calibrated to interrupt panic cycles, part of his training, not aggression. The stories grew with each telling, but few noticed the real details. The way Sarah arranged her recycling bins with military precision, or how she froze when a car backfired, even blocks away. Hidden in her nightstand were 2 thumb drives. One held her VA medical records, 17 pages listing PTSD, TBI, and shrapnel injuries that still ached with the weather. The other contained a single file, the Silver Star citation detailing how Sergeant Carter dragged 4 wounded Marines through mortar fire at Al-Assad Air Base, firing back with a rifle that jammed every 3rd round. The paperwork called it extraordinary heroism under fire. Her therapist called it survivor's guilt, wrapped tight around a sense of duty that never let go. At the VFW post 20 miles out, bartender Ray would pour her a bourbon she never drank. She'd trace the rim with her left thumb, the one missing a nail from a Kalashnikov round in Kandahar, leave $5 on the counter, and disappear. When Ray offered her the veteran job board, she shook her head. "Done enough," she said. The truth was simpler. She hadn't slept through a night since Fallujah, and the only job she could manage was cleaning kennels for cash, where sudden noises didn't mean danger. Once a year, Sarah appeared at the courthouse annex to renew her disabled veteran plates. The clerk always asked, "Which war?" Sarah answered, "All of them." The clerk stamped the form, never noticing the paperwork listed 3 deployments over 15 years. To Maple Street, she was just another quiet figure behind a leaning mailbox. To the VA, she was a case number. To herself, she was a point of stillness, counting the hours until the next walk, the next breath, never knowing when the world might tilt without warning. The trouble started with a metallic crash in aisle. 7-a-gallon can of peaches hit the tile, echoing off the fluorescent-lit aisles. Sarah Carter's hands locked around her shopping cart, knuckles gone pale. The can rolled, thudding against a display stand, and for a split second the store dissolved around her. The sound triggered old instincts. Incoming fire, shrapnel, the warning tones that once meant life or death. Before the can settled, Sarah dropped behind a stack of soup cans, left arm braced across Richter's back, right hand grasping for a weapon that wasn't there. Shoppers froze. A teenage clerk stared, wide-eyed, unsure if he should help or run. Someone whispered, "She just freaked out." Richter pressed against Sarah's ribs in his trained posture, steady and silent, trying to break the panic loop. Sarah barked a warning shot, sharp, as if ordering her team to take cover. The manager dialed 911 with one hand, gripping a bunch of bananas like a shield with the other. In the background, the store's music played on, oblivious. The officers arrived quickly. They found Sarah sitting against the dairy case, Richter's harness gripped tightly in both hands. Her eyes were wide, her breathing shallow, every muscle tense. One officer knelt beside her, speaking softly, asking if she needed medical help. Sarah answered in clipped fragments, "Negative, negative, standing by." The other officer watched Richter, uncertain but cautious. Sarah didn't resist when they cuffed Hirsch, simply turned her wrists, muscle memory from years of processing detainees. The officer noted her suspicious compliance in the report. As they walked her out, the crowd parted. A phone flashed. No one said a word about the scar above her right eyebrow, a mark left by a ricochet during an extraction mission outside Mosul. The booking records later revealed a 70% PTSD rating and a 30% TBI rating per her VA files. Richter was taken for quarantine, and Sarah was placed in a holding cell, silent and still. A public defender met her 3 hours later. He skimmed her file, offered a plea deal for misdemeanor public disturbance, and moved on. Sarah stared at the scratched wall, the words Semper Fi barely visible beneath the layers of old paint. The details of her service, her medals, her struggles, none of it came up. At the grocery store, employees cleaned up aisle 7. The dented peachkin went into the damaged goods bin. By closing time, the memory of the incident faded from the staff's minds, just another disruption in a quiet town. The next morning, her truck was towed from the fire lane. No one noticed the silver star plates. No one asked what had happened. By the time her mugshot appeared in the paper, the story had already begun to spread. In the days after the arrest, Sarah Carter's mugshot appeared in the local paper, tucked low on page 7. The caption read, "Local veteran arrested for public disturbance." There was no explanation of what happened in the grocery store, and no mention of her silver star or her years of service, just a grainy photo and a label that seemed to say all that mattered. At Earl's Diner, the regulars weighed in between mouthfuls of eggs and burnt toast. A retired schoolteacher, voice low, said, "She needs help, not handcuffs. We fail our veterans." Across the aisle, a contractor shook his head. "We can't have vets snapping like this in our shops. Makes people nervous." The waitress, pouring coffee, remembered Sarah's quiet presence in the winter. Always alone, always polite, but kept her thoughts to herself. By the time her court date arrived, most of the crowd had already made up its mind from 30 seconds of shaky cell phone video titled "Crazy Vet Freakout." The clip showed Sarah crouched behind a cereal display. Richter pressed to her leg, breathing short and sharp. It spread quickly, each share chipping away at her privacy and adding to the town's certainty about who she was. The local news ran a short piece echoing the police report, but left out any mention of her military record. There was no context, no explanation, just another incident, another headline. Inside the courthouse, the gallery filled with faces, neighbors, store clerks, a few from the VFW, who watched but said nothing. No one came as a friend. The prosecutor's file labeled her the defendant with prior behavioral issues. The public defender, juggling too many cases, barely glanced at her before the hearing began. The judge flipped through her thin file, looking for something that wasn't there. Outside, the courthouse steps became a stage for speculation. A mechanic wiped his hands on his jeans. "You ever see her house? No curtains, no lights on after dark. Not right." Someone else nodded, recalling seeing Sarah sitting motionless on her porch for hours, as if waiting for something to happen. They didn't know about the perimeter checks, or the way Richter circled the yard at her side, both of them listening for threats only they could sense. The jury foreman, a hardware store owner, checked his watch, already restless. For most in the room, the question wasn't what Sarah had endured, but how quickly the case could be resolved. As the judge entered, the room quieted, and all eyes turned to the defense table. Sarah Carter sat with her hands pressed flat to the defense table, fingers curled just enough to keep from trembling. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, giving the room a pale, washed-out look. Across from her, the prosecutor straightened his tie and spoke with practiced certainty. "Your Honor, the defendant's VA files show a 70% PTSD rating and 30% TBI. This is not a one-time outburst. A record demonstrates a serious, ongoing disability." He held up the printout for the jury to see, the blacked-out lines and stamped diagnoses visible from halfway across the room. The public defender, sleeves wrinkled and collar stained, barely looked up from his notes. When prompted for a response, he offered only, "She has a PTSD diagnosis." He didn't mention her years of service or the injuries listed in her discharge paperwork. The stack of documents he'd never opened sat untouched at his elbow. The judge listened, pen tapping quietly against her docket, as if waiting for a more substantial argument that never came. In the jury box, a bank teller scrolled through her phone, pausing when the prosecutor mentioned the VA file. A retired mechanic watched the empty space beside Sarah, noticing for the first time that Richter, her service dog, was missing. The absence hung in the air. One juror, halfway through jotting a note, stopped and looked up, the realization settling that something important had been left out. The video from the grocery store replayed in their minds, but without Richter pacing at Sarah's side, the scene felt incomplete. The prosecutor's voice sharpened. "She lives in the shadow of a uniform she no longer wears. Her service doesn't excuse this kind of behavior. That's not heroism. That's dangerous." He closed his folder and let the words settle. The public defender said nothing more. Sarah's eyes stayed fixed on the table, her shoulders squared against the weight of the room. The judge reviewed her notes, lips pressed thin, moving through the case with the efficiency of someone who had already decided. The trial moved quickly, each detail compressed into a handful of statements and a few minutes of video. No one asked about Sarah's medals, or what it meant to live with a mind trained for war and a body that never fully left the battlefield. When the judge asked if Sarah wanted to testify, she shook her head. The words she knew best, contact front, hold position, medevac requested, had no place here. The public defender gave her a reassuring pat, as if she were a child lost in a crowd. As the prosecutor's closing argument faded, the room felt smaller. The jury foreman folded his arms, eyes on the clock. The judge's hand hovered near her gavel, ready to mark the end of a case that had never truly begun. The silence pressed in, heavy and expectant, as if everyone sensed there was more to the story, but no one was willing to ask. The court documents gave Sarah Carter's service a single line: U.S. Marine Corps, 2003, 2011. There was no mention of the night in Ramadi when her convoy was hit by an IED, or how she crawled through burning diesel to pull 2 Marines from a wrecked Humvee, her uniform fusing into her skin and leaving scars in the shape of poison ivy. The Silver Star commendation paperwork, locked away at Camp Pendleton, described her holding a position with a dislocated shoulder, calling in coordinates until air support arrived. The medal itself sat in a shoebox under her bed, beneath discharge papers listing injuries, and nothing about what it took to earn them. No one in the courtroom saw the burn marks hidden under her sleeves. The prosecutor referred to her as the defendant with documented mental health issues, as if PTSD was a label from the dispatcher's 911 log, not a reaction to years spent in places where survival depended on reflex. When the jury foreman jotted down unpredictable behavior, he didn't know Sarah woke at the same minute every night the moment her watch stopped during the RPG attack in 2009. Richter, her service dog, would have recognized the signs, the tension in her shoulders, the way her breath caught at sudden noises. But Richter was locked away at animal control, pacing in a concrete run while Sarah sat alone at the defense table. When the prosecutor mentioned lack of remorse, he didn't know she remembered every Marine lost under her command, or that she still sent birthday cards to their families each year. The judge paused at her VA disability rating, 70% for PTSD, 30% for traumatic brain injury, then moved on. The stack of letters from Marines who credited Sarah with saving their lives, the photo of her squad in the Iraq dust, never made it into evidence. Down the hall, a bailiff joked about another broken soldier, not knowing Sarah had once talked to Private off a barracks roof days before his daughter was born. Her public defender alluded to mitigating circumstances, but never mentioned her testimony before Congress about veteran healthcare or her refusal of painkillers after surgery to avoid addiction. The grocery store cashier on the witness stand described how Sarah looked right through me, not recognizing the 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing too much. The prosecutor straightened his tie. Your Honor, we can't have this kind of behavior in our community. Outside, a car backfired. Sarah's shoulders tightened, then relaxed, unnoticed, except by the court stenographer, who recognized the pattern, but returned to her transcript as the judge prepared to speak. The room was poised for a decision, everyone waiting for the case to close. The judge's hand hovered, ready for the final word. The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a sharp, deliberate sound. Heads turned. A woman entered, her uniform crisp, her stride measured. She wore dress bluest with silver stars on each shoulder. Authority filled the room. The judge stood without thinking, and the silence deepened. Even the bailiff, halfway to rising, settled back into his chair. No one needed an introduction. The weight of her presence pressed against every wall. General Maria Alvarez walked down the center aisle, her gaze steady, her steps even. She did not rush. Each movement seemed to carry its own gravity. The prosecutor's pen hung in midair, ink pooling in a small, dark spot. Sarah Carter's hands pressed flat against the table, her posture rigid. The general stopped just short of the bench, her eyes never leaving the judge. Your Honor, she said, voice calm but carrying, I'm here to testify about Captain Carter's record of saving lives under fire. She produced a folded document from her jacket. This is her service record. Page 4 details the night she earned the Silver Star. She handed it to the bailiff, who brought it forward with both hands. The judge's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper, scanning the lines that described actions most people in the room could not imagine. The general's eyes found Sarah's. There was no smile, no nod, just the recognition of someone who had seen the same things and survived them. The jury foreman, who had been slouching, sat up straight. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, unsure whether to object or stay silent. The judge spoke, her voice quieter. General, this is an unusual intervention. General Alvarez did not hesitate. So is prosecuting a decorated combat veteran for symptoms of the very injuries she sustained in service to this country. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The words hung in the air, undeniable. Lieutenant, she said, turning to the prosecutor, did you review her VA file before you filed these charges? Did you read the citations for valor? The dog you impounded is trained to keep her alive after brain trauma. Every behavior you call dangerous is a learned response to keep others safe. The jury rustled. A woman in the back pressed a tissue to her eye. The general's attention never wavered from the front of the room. The public defender, who had been silent, finally stood. Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges. His voice was thin, almost lost in the hush. The judge looked at the paperwork in her hands, then at Sarah, then at the general. She set her glasses aside. Return Captain Carter's service dog, and see that she is given a seat. The general remained standing, her posture protective, a silent statement that she was not leaving until justice was done. The room held its breath. The general moved toward the witness stand, her uniform catching the light. The judge nodded once, signaling her to continue. General Alvarez began without hesitation, her voice steady and precise. November 2007. A convoy returning from Fallujah struck an IED complex outside Ramadi. Captain Carter's vehicle took the worst of it. She looked directly at the jury, her tone matter-of-fact. She described the chaos that followed how Sarah dragged 2 wounded Marines across open ground under fire, then took up a defensive position. Her Silver Star citation records 12 confirmed enemy kills in under 5 minutes. Each shot fired with a cracked scope despite shrapnel dimpling her shoulder. The courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor glanced down, his fingers frozen on a stack of papers. One juror pressed a tissue to her face, eyes fixed on the general. The details were clear and specific, no embellishment, no need for dramatics. Alvarez continued, recounting the field hospital. They found 7 pieces of hot metal in her body. Not a single Marine in that convoy died. She paused, letting the facts stand on their own. Turning to Sarah, the general's words shifted. Soldiers like Captain Carter don't break. We just fail to notice when the weight they carry becomes too much. The judge watched, glasses in hand, absorbing every word. The prosecutor's pen slid off the table and clattered to the floor, ignored. Alvarez spoke of the Haditha Dam operation, but kept it brief how Sarah ran a makeshift aid station for hours under fire, refusing to leave her wounded. She mentioned the letters from Marines Sarah had saved, the families who still sent her notes every year. The jury listened, the earlier certainty in their eyes replaced by something closer to understanding. On the bench, the judge examined the service record the general had brought. There were photograph-scorched vehicles, blood-stained uniforms, the triage station where Sarah had worked until she collapsed. The paperwork told a story that the courtroom had never heard until now. Sarah sat quietly, her hands folded, her gaze steady. For the first time, she looked up and met the general's eyes. There was no need for words. The recognition in that moment was enough. Judge Watkins set her glasses aside and looked at Sarah not as a defendant, but as someone who had given more than most could comprehend. She spoke quietly. "Captain Carter, this town owes you more than an apology." There was no gavel, just the faint sound of wood meeting wood. The general gave the smallest nod, an acknowledgement that needed nothing added. The courtroom held its silence, everyone aware that something irreversible had just shifted. The outcome was no longer in doubt. The judge signed the dismissal, and Sarah Carter remained at the defense table until General Alvarez gave a nod. She stood, sliding the visitor badge across the counter without a word. The bailiff closed her file, and the courtroom emptied, leaving behind the faint scent of coffee and old wood polish. Outside, sunlight caught Sarah off guard. She blinked, disoriented, as Richter greeted her without hesitation, tail wagging despite recent kennel confinement. His harness was a little crooked, but he pressed against her side, nose nudging her palm as if nothing had changed. General Alvarez walked out with her, settling quietly at Sarah's right. They stood together on the courthouse steps, watching the crowd dissolve into the rhythms of an ordinary day. The grocery store manager hurried to his car, keys jangling. The woman from the diner who'd once called Sarah dangerous paused in the lot, hesitated, and walked on. A reporter hovered near the curb, camera in hand, uncertain if the story was finished. When he stepped forward, Richter's ears pricked, and a low growl started in his chest. The general raised her hand, palm out, and the man stopped, thinking better of it. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket. Missed calls from the VA clinic, a dozen unread texts from Ray at the VFW. She ignored them for now. The general cleared her throat. "You all right, Captain?" Not a civilian's question, but one that measured readiness, not comfort. Sarah nodded, the movement tight at her scarred collarbone. She felt the general's gaze, measuring the lines time had drawn on her face. The judge crossed the parking lot, her heels sharp on the concrete. She stopped beside Sarah, hesitated, then touched her elbow. "My son was at Pendleton. I owe you this." She pressed a business card into Sarah's hand, the number for the county veterans office scrawled on the back. No speeches, just a quiet connection. Across the street, the barista from Brood Awakening watched from the cafe window. When Sarah looked up, the woman raised her cup in a small salute while Richter gently lunged forward, alert but calm. The general noted the gesture, a faint hum of approval in her throat. "They'll talk differently about you now," she said. Sarah flexed her fingers, the bruises on her wrists already fading. Yesterday she was a problem to solve. Today she was someone who'd carried others out of fire. The general's phone rang Pentagon. By the screen butt, she let it go silent. At the edge of the lot, Mrs. Wilkins brushed pine needles from Sarah's truck windshield, the silver star plate glinting in the sun. The general checked her watch. 90 minutes before my plane. It was just information, not an invitation or an order. Sarah glanced at the judge's card, then slid it into her pocket beside the unread VA messages. Richter nudged her knee, waiting. "There's a diner," Sarah said. The general fell into step beside her, and this time, Sarah didn't have to slow down or explain. They walked together, the courthouse fading behind them, the world outside shifting just enough to let something new begin. Sarah Carter's story isn't unique. Less than 1 in 10 decorated veterans receives public recognition for what they've endured after service. The silent battles continue behind closed doors, in VA waiting rooms, and along the quiet streets of every town. There are heroes among us, whose hands still flinch at sudden noise, whose minds map out exits in every store. Sometimes, the world pauses long enough for truth to surface. In those moments, we see the cost carried home-etched in scars and silence, not in headlines. If this story moved you, share it in the comments and let us know how you honor the silent heroes in your life. Their battles continue long after the parade ends.